You probably grew up hearing an old story. Persephone, young and innocent, picking flowers on a sunny day, is suddenly abducted by Hades, god of the underworld, and dragged into darkness against her will. A tale of fear, helplessness, and domination. That's how most of us were told this myth. But myths are more than just stories. They are mirrors. And sometimes, they are cages, built to keep us comfortable in the roles they've carved for us. But what happens when the story breaks? But what if I told you there's another version? A story buried between the lines of ancient Orphic poems, deliberately forgotten through the ages, but now ready to be uncovered. What if Persephone wasn't a powerless victim? What if, instead, she made a conscious, powerful, and transformative decision? A silent choice that would redefine not only her fate, but the balance between life and death. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a different take on an ancient goddess. It's a mirror, a reflection of our own hidden strength, our ability to turn darkness into power, and the moment we choose to descend, only to rise again, wiser, stronger, and more true to ourselves. Stay until the end, and I promise, you'll never see Persephone or yourself the same way again. Before she became queen of the underworld, Persephone was just a young goddess among flowers, daughter of Demeter, the mighty goddess of the harvest. She lived surrounded by eternally green fields, blossoms that never wilted, and fruits that never rotted. It was a paradise of abundance, and she was the most delicate jewel in that divine garden. But here's a detail rarely told. Even surrounded by beauty, Persephone didn't feel whole. She was the goddess of spring, yes, but a spring without mystery, without shadow, without depth. Everything around her was controlled, supervised, preserved, like a flower kept under glass, lovely, untouched, incomplete. Where Demeter saw protection, Persephone felt limitation. While the gods revered her as a symbol of renewal, she quietly wondered, what if there's more than this surface? What if something exists that doesn't bloom, but transforms? The myths say she loved picking flowers. But maybe it was more than a pastime. Maybe it was an unconscious search. Each petal she plucked, each blossom she held close, as if seeking something she couldn't yet name. And there was a sound, a dull echo beneath her feet, one no one else seemed to hear. A whisper from deep within the earth. The underworld stirring, and Persephone, though unaware, was starting to listen. This isn't the kind of thing taught at the altars. It's the kind of restlessness that rises when the soul is ready to grow. Not upward, like the trees, but inward, like the roots. It was in that fertile soil of silence and curiosity that her true story began. Because sometimes, the most powerful omens don't come from the gods. They come from within. One day, as Persephone wandered farther than usual, drawn to a quiet meadow where no other gods ventured, the ground beneath her trembled, not violently, but like a breath held for too long, finally exhaled. The myths say the earth split open, and Hades emerged in a golden chariot, pulling her into the shadows. But what if that crack in the earth wasn't an ambush, but an invitation? Some ancient Orphic texts hint at a different tale. One where Persephone doesn't scream. One where there's no struggle, no tearing of the skies. Only a moment, strangely still, where the veil between worlds thins, and she steps through it. Maybe Hades didn't seize her. Maybe he stood, silent, at the edge of his realm, and she, tired of eternal spring, tired of only ever being seen as someone's daughter, chose to descend, not out of fear, but curiosity, and a pull that words couldn't explain. In this version, Hades isn't a monster. He is quiet, steady. A figure cloaked in night, not with menace, but with mystery. He offers no crown, no promises, only presence. And that was enough. Because deep down, Persephone already knew. There are parts of ourselves we cannot meet under the sun. They live in the places we're told to avoid, in silence, in solitude, in shadow. And so she follows the sound, the dull hum from beneath the earth that has haunted her dreams. Not as a victim, but as someone answering a call she's felt her whole life. That day wasn't an abduction. It was a beginning. Down she went. Not dragged, not torn from light against her will, but led by something older than memory. A quiet knowing that this descent was hers to make. No ancient hymn describes her resisting. No epic speaks of chains or cries. What they do mention, if you read carefully, is that she vanished, as if stepping into a place where language couldn't follow. This is not how we're taught to think of descent. We imagine it loud, violent, tragic. But some journeys happen in silence, and some choices are made not in words, but in stillness. She crossed the threshold between life and death without flinching, because there was a part of her, untouched by spring, that had always belonged to the dark. Every soul must face that moment. The point where remaining in the familiar feels more terrifying than stepping into the unknown. Persephone reached that moment and walked through it. She didn't know what waited for her, only that she could no longer stay where she was. Was it bravery? Was it surrender? Maybe it was both. Maybe choosing the underworld wasn't about seeking power or love or escape. Maybe it was about becoming whole. Not the half-remembered girl of flowers and innocence, but the woman who could walk through shadow and still bloom from within. And so she made her silent choice, not because someone called her, but because she was ready and the earth closed above her. Not like a trap, but like a door she had chosen to open. The world below was nothing like the tales had warned. There was no fire, no screaming, no endless chaos. There was quiet, endless halls carved from obsidian and shadow, still rivers that knew every soul by name, a realm not of torment, but of truth. And in that silence, Persephone changed. She was no longer Demeter's daughter, no longer a girl hidden in gardens. Here, in the underworld, she became something else entirely, a queen. Not all power arrives with thunder. Sometimes it enters like dusk, slowly, quietly, until you realize you're no longer the same. Persephone didn't seize the throne. She became it. Every breath she took underground drew the pieces of herself back together. Not forged by others, but discovered in silence. Not crowned in gold, but in gravity. Not feared, but revered. She learned to walk with purpose through corridors of silence, to speak with the dead and understand what the living had forgotten. Her voice no longer soft with spring, but steady, measured like the passing of seasons. Hades did not command her. He watched, he listened, he made space beside his throne, and she took it. Their union was not thunderous passion, but something rarer, recognition. Two beings who understood the weight of solitude and the strange peace it brings. Persephone ruled not by fear, but by presence. She judged with compassion. She listened longer than others dared. And when she walked among the shades, they did not weep. They bowed. Because in her, they saw both light and shadow. Not a goddess of death, but one who had met it and remained whole. The pomegranate, often seen as her trap, was perhaps her choice. Its seeds, not chains, but anchors. A symbol not of what she lost, but of what she claimed. And so, in the heart of the underworld, Persephone stopped being the girl who vanished and became the queen who stayed. Above, the world mourned. Demeter searched the earth, her cries turning crops to dust. The trees refused to bear fruit, the river slowed, and winter, true winter, touched the land for the very first time. To mortals, it seemed the world had been cursed, but it was not a curse. It was grief, not for a daughter stolen, but for a daughter transformed. Demeter couldn't recognize the woman her child had become. She had sent a flower and received a flame. Eventually, a bargain was struck. Persephone would return to the surface for part of the year and remain in the underworld for the rest. But here lies the truth hidden behind the myth. She never truly returned, not in the way people expected. She rose, yes, but she rose changed. Her footsteps didn't echo as they once had. The earth didn't welcome her with celebration. It waited, as if it, too, knew that she had gone where even gods do not tread lightly. The light that once danced around her now flickered from within. The spring she brought was no longer just renewal. It was rebirth through knowing. The flowers bloomed differently when she walked past, as if they, too, had touched the dark and come back wiser. And the people felt it. Though they didn't understand, they knew something was different. There was a new stillness in the wind, a softness in the soil. Because Persephone was no longer just the goddess of spring. She was the keeper of balance, the bridge between beginnings and endings, between innocence and depth. Every year she descended again, not as punishment, but as ritual, not to be reclaimed, but to remember. The underworld was not her exile. It was her temple, a sacred space where she laid down her crown of petals and stepped back into her throne of stone. And with each descent, she reminded the world that growth doesn't only happen in sunlight, that some parts of the soul can only be found in darkness, and that death, real or symbolic, is not an end. It's a turning, a return. Spring became more than a season. It became a story, her story, a rhythm of descent and rise, of shedding and blooming. And so the wheel turned and turns still. Each year, Persephone slips back into the shadows, not because she must, but because she chooses to. Because to bring life, you must understand death. Because to carry light, you must have walked through shadow. And because the most sacred journeys are the ones we make again and again, until we no longer fear the dark. Why does this story linger? Why, after thousands of years, do we still tell it? In temples, in poems, in quiet whispers before sleep? Because it isn't just about gods. It's about us. Persephone's descent isn't simply a myth. It's a mirror, a sacred metaphor of transformation that plays out not in the heavens, but in the human soul. We've all lived moments like hers, moments when something in us begins to unravel, not from tragedy, but from truth. Moments when the life that once fit begins to suffocate, and we realize we can no longer pretend. Times when the life we knew began to feel too narrow, too bright, too loud, like wearing clothes that no longer fit. We've all felt the pull toward something deeper, something darker, something others might not understand. And we've all been warned to stay away, to keep smiling, to stay in the light, to fear what lies below. But the truth is, there are truths you can only find in the dark, parts of yourself that only reveal themselves when everything else has been stripped away. When Persephone stepped into the underworld, she didn't lose herself. She found the rest of her. She found the version of herself that could say no, that could speak powerfully and stand still in silence, that could hold space for pain without breaking, and witness death without being consumed by it. She became not one woman, but many: goddess, daughter, queen, guide. And through her story, we remember that becoming whole often means letting go of who we were told to be. The myth teaches us that you can walk away from roles, from expectations, from the person others need you to be, and not vanish, but bloom. Even now, Persephone's cycle lives inside us. The descent into grief, heartbreak, doubt. The quiet pause where nothing grows. And then, unexpected, fragile, the first bloom. The myth reminds us that descent is not failure. It is preparation. It is initiation. It is a return to something ancient inside ourselves that has always known how to survive the winter. So when you feel the earth tremble under your feet, when something inside you longs to go deeper, remember her. When you choose rest instead of performance, when you choose solitude over applause, when you choose healing over pretending, you are living her story. Not because you were stolen, but because you remembered. And because you too were meant to reign not only in the sunlight, but in the shadows. You've heard the tale 1,000 times before, but tonight you heard it differently. And maybe now, when someone says Persephone was taken, you'll pause. Because maybe, just maybe, she walked into the shadows with her head held high. Not as a victim, but as a seeker, as a sovereign soul, reclaiming a part of herself that had always been waiting below the surface. There is strength in softness. There is wisdom in descent. And there is divinity in the decision to become more than what the world expected. Persephone's story is not a warning, it's a guide, a reminder that healing is not always found in the light, that balance is sacred, and that wholeness often means embracing both bloom and decay. So, if you ever feel like you've slipped below the surface, if life grows quiet and the world seems to move on without you, don't rush to rise. Honor the stillness. Let the silence speak. Because maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're transforming. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a sense of your own hidden power, you're not alone. There are many more stories like this one. Forgotten myths, sacred truths, softly spoken, so your soul can hear. Let this not be the end of the story, but the beginning of how you carry it. Whisper it to your younger self. Hold it close when you feel yourself sinking. Let Persephone's name remind you that your darkness was never your end. It was your crown, waiting to be claimed. Subscribe to Lullabies of the Gods. Let the ancient voices keep you company as you sleep and awaken something timeless inside you. Because some truths are not shouted, they are whispered, and you are meant to remember them. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the world feels softer than usual, you might dream of her. You won't see her clearly, only the outline of a woman walking through fields that bloom and wither at the same time. A shadow made of spring and smoke, crowned not in gold, but in memory. She won't speak, but something in you will understand, because the dream isn't just about her. It's about the part of you that dares to change, the part that chooses silence over noise, depth over distraction, truth over comfort. You'll wake up with her name lingering on your lips, and though you may forget the details of the dream, you'll carry its echo, a reminder that she was never just a myth. She was a guide, and she walks with you still, each time you descend into yourself and rise.